I made this video to find an answer to a question I've had for a while. I was bored and scrolling through my Steam library, which led me to the achievements page for Celeste. I looked at the achievement for beating the game, and it's that 39.8% of players had gotten it, and then 7% had every seaside? Wow, I thought this game was pretty hard, I said to myself. Now I was concerned I was terrible at platformers, and this game was easy for everybody else, so I looked at the stats for Super Meat Boy, but it said that only 6.5% of players had even beaten the game, so what was up? How have more people played Celeste to the point of beating every single B and C side than have just finished Super Meat Boy? No bandages or anything. Both games take about 8 or 9 hours to beat, so it's not about their length either. But then I thought back to my first playthrough of both games. I love Celeste to the point where I had to limit myself to only 2 or 3 levels at a time. I couldn't stop playing, it was great. But then with Meat Boy, I played it, I was having a decently good time, but I stopped at about the 3rd world and just gave up. So I decided to look into why that was, and that's what this video is. What does Celeste do that Super Meat Boy doesn't? Also, before we get started, I have actually finished Super Meat Boy since then, and I like it a lot now. Oh, and I'm going to be spoiling a lot of what these games do. I'll keep the story spoilers to a minimum, but if gameplay spoilers are something that you're worried about, then take this as your final warning. Still with me? Cool, let's go. Celeste and Super Meat Boy released in 2010 and 2018, and I think they both represent an entirely different era of platformer design. It's the main reason why I think that Celeste works nowadays, and Meat Boy struggles at times. Super Meat Boy was released on the Xbox 360 to the Xbox Live Arcade. It's an upgraded version of the Flash game Meat Boy, which released 2 years before on Newgrounds, and is where the game's brilliant creativity and dark humour both come from. Special attention to the world where your main obstacle is salt, and it kills you because you don't have any skin. That's just brilliant. Much like other Flash games, Super Meat Boy is a rage game. The levels have a kind of point and laugh level design to them, almost akin to something like Cat Mario, except more fair and much quicker paced. In Super Meat Boy, you can die 20 times in a level that takes you 15 seconds to finish, Edmund McMillen said in an interview with GameSpeed. Speed was clearly a focus of design here. 5 years later, and Super Mario Maker releases on the Wii U, letting an entire new wave of game developers mess around with Mario's well-built engine. With Mario games and Kaizo ROM hacks of said Mario games specifically being a primary inspiration for Matty Thorson, Noel Berry, and Celeste's entire development team, it shouldn't be too surprising to learn that Celeste started development the year after the game's release. Maddie even publicly made a few levels in Mario Maker 2. They're pretty good. I'll put the level IDs in the description, but the point is that the inspiration is clear. Like, okay, look at this jump with the jellyfish in Farewell, and then compare that with maybe the most staple Kaizo mechanic of all, the shell jump. There's a clear influence there, and as a game trying to make Kaizo possible for anybody, yeah, I think it works. At least, on a level design standpoint, I think it works. Celeste levels feel like somebody took a level in a Kaizo game, stretched it out to be significantly longer, tweaked the difficulty a tiny bit, and then spliced each challenge into its own individual screen. That could go for just about any level in Celeste. They both pull from two very similar but very distinct genres, the Rage game and the Kaizo game, and both games kind of blur the line between both, to be honest. Meat Boy's toughest challenges come from aggressively tight precision and handling your bizarre physics, and Celeste come from tight inputs and puzzle platforming. If Meat Boy's challenges feel tight and claustrophobic, then Celeste feel open and almost logical. Right, now that I know both games' design philosophies, let's get into... If you want to get into level design, the first thing that you learn is that games usually try and teach things in as few tutorials as possible, using the natural progression of the game. The classic example everybody uses is Mario 1-1. You've got a Goomba and a question mark block and a mushroom. It doesn't tell you what any of them do, but once you figure it out on your own, it'll stick, because you actually learned it on your own. And both games do that. Apart from the odd signpost or bird telling you what buttons to press, you learn each level's mechanics by just playing through them. Even with things like Meat Boy's weird jumps, you figure it out through the levels. Celeste does something really cool here actually. Pretty much every main mechanic has multiple purposes, but it doesn't tell you that at first. It's pretty late into the level before it starts showing you what else these mechanics can do. Take the traffic light platforms in Forsaken City for example. Start by learning that these things will fling you off into spikes if you jump off them wrong. So now you know the timing to get launched by the platform, and the timing not to get launched by the platform. Okay, but what if we abuse that launch to make it across a massive gap? Now we really get how the momentum works. And then what happens if there's a spike in the way, or a spring on the platform, or if we grab onto the side of it? The game's careful to teach a new mechanic as a solution to a simple puzzle, and then add that to the library of things you've learned, able to be tested later on. Meat Boy gets this a bit wrong in my opinion. It still follows the main design philosophy of teaching a concept and then remixing it into something new, but I think it struggles to actually teach things properly. I still couldn't tell you exactly how those wind jets work in level 2. Take the Hell World for example. They introduce so much at once. Moving platforms, lava bubbles, rising and falling lava, the weird mouth things, laser eyes, and it's overwhelming. The levels aren't poorly designed, they just don't give the ideas room to breathe. I don't think the game necessarily needs an entire level dedicated to every tiny mechanic, but I think introducing multiple at once like this is awful for new players. In fact, Meat Boy's design actually pretty much revolves around rewarding players who already understand the game, and punishing those who don't. Like, okay, did you know that the hitbox of a saw blade actually increases if they have blood on them? I.e. if you've already died to it. It doesn't make any sense logically, but if you want a way to reward a player who can make an exact jump on their first try, that's brilliant. But yeah, that being said, I get why this kind of design puts people off beating the game. It's so easy to give up as a beginner player. You need to already know what to do in order to succeed. So, the level design in both games is very tight. Celeste just has a more modern and fairer approach teaching mechanics and designing screens, which come from the two genres both games are trying to be. And I could leave the video there, but I think there's a lot more than just level design here. That's not a satisfying enough answer. In my eyes, a good difficulty curve is one where it doesn't feel like there is one at all. I don't mean that the game doesn't get any harder, I mean that you beat the game and you don't notice a mass difficulty spike, and then maybe you go back to some of the other levels and think to yourself, wow, how was this ever a challenge? And both of them nail it, both in their own unique way. Meat Boy has a much steeper curve than Celeste, but they both definitely gave me that feeling. Even more so than Meat Boy, to be honest. The first Meat Boy screen is easy in Celeste, but the final Meat Boy screen is so much harder. It means that by the end of your first playthrough, you're an incredibly competent player. You'd have to be. The challenges put in front of you are difficult, like almost too difficult. But with the difficulty curve, it's well done. Well, almost. The game lets you skip a few levels in each world. I get that this is meant to help people who are struggling, but by letting them do this, they also skip out on all of the learning in that level. Imagine the player doesn't understand how to get past these eye lasers the first time they see them, so they just skip the level. Now for the whole rest of the game, they don't make any sense. It makes the difficulty and learning curve have gaps in them. Look, I get this is meant to be an optional accessibility feature for those who need it, but this isn't how you do accessibility. It shouldn't take content out of the game, it should make it friendlier for those who need it. I wouldn't be surprised if it actually did make a difference in terms of the achievement stats, by the way. This stuff is really important. Anyway, Celeste sometimes struggles with difficulty spikes too. Almost everybody who I've spoken to played the game was shocked with the difficulty spike in Celestia Resort. I have 3 close friends who stopped playing after Celestia Resort. It is a harsh spike. I mean, look at my death counts. This wasn't even my first playthrough. First time through, this level takes about an hour, compared to the 20-25 minutes you're used to from the first 2 levels. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe some of the mechanics could have split off into their own thing and become 2 separate, shorter levels? Outside of this though, Celeste handled difficulty really well. Everybody who I asked on Twitter gave a different answer for their harshest difficulty spike, and for a game this hard, I think that's an amazing goal to aim for. But do I really think this has the biggest impact on how many people finish both games? Not really. I think that both games are equal in how often and how harshly they spike, so it kind of cancels itself out. But what I do think plays a factor though, if not the biggest one of all, is pacing. Pacing isn't just a question about is the story engaging, it's a lot more nuanced than that. It's how you keep gameplay fresh and the player excited to keep going and actually play the game more. Good pacing should mix up your gameplay, but not too much to the point where you're just doing random side content for the sake of it. I'm sure you've been annoyed at a pointless side quest or a complete tonal shift of a minigame before. That's what we want to avoid here. In Super Meat Boy, the most difference that you get between levels is a new platform layout, sometimes a bandage, sometimes a new mechanic, and sometimes a warp zone or palette swap. But that's about it. I'll usually find myself about 14 or 15 levels into a Meat Boy world with no idea how many levels I've just beaten, until I go back to the map screen. There's nothing really to build tension, or visually split it apart a little bit, it's just platforming. The story's incredible light throughout the whole game, much like the SNES games it referenced from. And yeah, while this does make the platform able to properly shine, this game really is just platforming. You have to like really tough platforming in order to beat Super Meat Boy. And of course, Celeste is still just platforming, but there's so much distraction in each level. Strawberries, cassette tapes, crystal hearts, and there's significant changes in the background, music, and just overall emotion. Look at Mirror Temple. You start off slowly, and gradually you turn the lights on and uncover this bizarre, ruined place, slowly finding strawberries and wondering what happened to Theo. Then you get dragged through a mirror and the whole place shifts to be open but ominous. The music is quiet and there's a proper growing atmosphere. And then when you finally do find Theo, you have to carry him through the depths of this place, and as you work together the music ramps up and you're dodging the eye creatures that you've been taught how to avoid in a perfect piece of game design, where you learn exactly what these new enemies do by you moving them around and seeing their strengths and limitations. I'm certain you can see how this is different. Everything builds up alongside each other, and once you're almost at the end you can feel it. It's paced incredibly, and it's so different from just level after level of platforming challenges. And it's doing this kind of thing throughout, like how Reflection doesn't have any strawberries to let you just focus on the platforming and show you that nothing else really matters anymore, or like how Summit gives you these countdown markers to tell you you're almost there, this is it. The game is pushing you along at all times and you feel determined to climb the mountain, even if you don't really believe you can. This isn't just a good story, this is good level design perfectly tied into a good story. And it makes such a massive difference. It makes you actually want to beat Celeste. You see yourself getting close to a goal that felt impossible. There's none of that in Super Meat Boy, because there's not any kind of feeling that you're getting closer to the end. It means the story doesn't escalate. It can't escalate, and you can't connect to it like you can with Celeste. You have to push yourself to beat Super Meat Boy, instead of the game pushing you to beat Celeste. And yeah, I think that's why a lot of people just gave up on it. Even when making a video about why I think that Meat Boy's design is tough but fair, I still couldn't bring myself to complete it. The plan was to get Golden God while recording footage, but I just couldn't do it. And then I've beaten Celeste 4 times and speedrun it twice. I think it wouldn't be fair to say that Celeste is just a better game than Meat Boy, but on a level design, and frankly, on a game design standpoint, yeah, I think it is. I think what I've learned is that these types of games only really work properly when you A, have a good incentive to keep the player going, B, have the experience kept fresh through interesting mechanics and visuals to break up your pacing, and C, have an insanely well built difficulty curve. You forget one of these 3 elements and you end up with a game that either struggles to make you want to play it in the first place, gets dull to the point of making you want to give up, or just feels unfair and makes the player quit even if they want to keep playing. And I think that's what went wrong here. Meat Boy doesn't get any of these entirely wrong, but it struggles a lot with the first 2, making it only a really fun challenge for people who are already good at platformers and self-motivated. Celeste, well, even if you haven't played a platformer before, the game still makes you want to beat it, and you probably will. That, in my opinion, is the real difference between the 2 of them. Thanks for watching.